just to give you a run of proceedings, I will do a brief overview, introduce the speakers, and then you'll hear from them in turn about their various topics, and we will open up for questions on the chat. So you can at any point put the questions in. Either myself or Fiona will put them to the speakers. So please place anything that you'd like to ask or comment on in the chat. Hopefully this will be a really informative session and we'll have a good discussion around that. Bear with me for one moment. There we go. I think I've sorted that, Fiona. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming to our seminar on AI and automation in the workplace. It's a crucial and timely conversation about how AI is shaping the future of work, and also, more importantly, how we can shape AI to work for us. We all know AI is rapidly transforming the way businesses operate, the roles people play, and the skills we need. But with this transformation comes responsibility, a responsibility to ensure workers are protected, supported, and empowered in this new era. So today we've brought together a range of voices to explore this from various perspectives. We'll be hearing from speakers such as Adam Cantwell-Corn from the Trade Unions Congress, who are calling for strong government policy and clear employee protection to guide the ethical and fair use of AI. Then we'll be hearing from Penny Jones, the responsible AI lead at Zurich, on how the organisation is embracing AI and recognising the value of technology and placing people and their dignity at the centre of this innovation. We'll also hear about Community's AI Charter that will be launching next year, urging employees to commit to training for the future of work, protecting creative and meaningful roles, and ensuring that young people entering the workforce are not left behind as jobs evolve. And then finally, we'll hear from Nick Scott from Unions 21, who will outline the critical roles unions themselves play, not just in holding others to account, but by leading by example, talking about how unions can responsibly use AI to advocate for skills and training and prepare representatives to negotiate effectively in this changing landscape. So together our speakers will hopefully help us navigate the challenges and opportunities ahead. And as I mentioned, if you've got any questions or anything you would like to share, please put it in the chat and we will put it to the speakers. So if I could hand over now to Adam.
Great, thanks, Caroline. I'm just going to share presentation. All right. Thanks, everyone, and good morning. My name's Adam. I'm the TUC's Tech Policy Lead. I'm going to do a short presentation to kick off the conversation about understanding and negotiating AI and a little bit about what the TUC is doing and saying. So the first thing I usually start these presentations by having a short bit about defining AI, because it's something that is such a prominent, high-profile, politicized conversation at the moment, but often it's kind of like used in sort of pretty ambiguous and loosely defined ways. So I'm going to give a bit of a wordy definition to start with, but then I'm going to break it down and sort of like thread that through the rest of my discussion. So the OECD definition says that AI is a system that is machine-based, so based on computers, that for explicit or implicit objectives infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions. Just breaking that down, a machine-based system, so far straightforward. For explicit or implicit objectives, i.e. there's a goal or there's a aim for a system, it makes inferences and predictions from the input, which is the data, and it's a really critical part. The data is the sort of raw material to generate outputs as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions. So there's a goal, there's an algorithmic process that makes inferences on the input, which is the data, and then produces something. And whilst these are obviously technical and technological things, there's also very human, political, and practical questions around all of those things. What is the goal? What's the data? What might be the qualities and characteristics of an output? And then obviously how you might use them or deploy them. And I like to use this meme from the Wizard of Oz to basically explain that, like, it's not a sort of godlike machine, although some people would like us to believe that. It's actually very personal, political, professional, organizational decisions about how AI is developed and deployed and designed, which should give us confidence in understanding how to engage with it in a way that unions have forever. The second point is that whilst AI obviously has those same features of using data through algorithmic processes to make predictions or content, it's not one technology, and it's useful to break that down. Facial recognition is a form of AI technology. ChatGPT, which is obviously the form of the generative AI, which is the form of AI that has sort of like really propelled it into public and political consciousness. But it's also the algorithmic systems or automated decision-making systems that, for example, Uber uses to set algorithmic pricing, which raises concerns about discrimination and downward pressure on wages in the gig economy, for example. And then different forms of AI can stack together with different other technological systems. So generative AI might be stacked with an automated decision-making system, and then into a computer vision system, and then into some robotics to perform a whole technological set, which can perform obviously a range of different tasks. And I say all of that because we need to cut through the hype, and we do need to be precise about what we're talking about here to really understand, therefore, how to respond. And whilst cutting through the hype and challenging some of the often overinflated claims that are made about AI, or the ambiguous claims that are made about AI, we also do need to say and recognize that today is the least good this technology is going to be. Maybe it won't get so much better, maybe it will, but we know that it is unlikely to get worse. So how does that impact AI? How does that impact workers? So the first thing to say that there are obviously some arguments for AI at work. It can reduce barriers to knowledge and skills. I think lots of people are experiencing that with generative AI in particular, using it as a sort of like advanced search engine, or to sort of solve the blank paper problem, or to surface and synthesize knowledge and information that otherwise might be more inaccessible for various different reasons. There's obviously lots of arguments about it being used to deliver menial work, which can free up humans to do more meaningful or substantive work. At the sort of like macro level, if it does produce significant gains in productivity, and that is a big if, because there is very little evidence so far that it will, is that more productivity produces more sort of economic activity, and therefore potentially more wealth to share for us all. That's the theory anyway. And one of the big kind of promises of AI, but also all sorts of technologies, has been this idea of a leisure dividend, meaning that if machines do more of the work, produce more wealth, we can have more time off, essentially, to do poetry and spend time with our family or whatever you would like to do. And then there's obviously the arguments generally about AI for good in general, being used in life sciences or for climate applications or so on. But the reason why I sort of like go through that is because we need to understand that it has, although there are those familiar universal aspects, there's also contextual settings in which it applies. So there's this interesting example which is actually scaled now, where social workers are using a tool called Magic Notes to automate the write-up of notes that they have with service users in their social work. In this trial, the social workers reported that they spent 60% less time on admin tasks, and that was enabling them to, quote, engage in meaningful person-centered conversation, more time to engage in meaningful person-centered conversations with those they support. So there's a kind of like good example here of the way in which AI is being used to cut menial tasks, but raise up the ability for workers to do more meaningful stuff. Obviously, there's lots of arguments against AI at work, which you may be familiar with: surveillance and micromanagement, and the sort of automation of and increase in kind of like management control. De-skilling, if we're outsourcing lots of stuff to machines, does that de-skill us and therefore has impacts on dignity and our autonomy? related aspects around job displacement. If more tasks are being performed by machines, does that mean there's less demand for workers? This is a really important one, accountability and redress. Increasingly, HR or management decisions, whether that's target setting, performance management, analysis, so on, are being mediated or delivered through automated systems, which means that there might be less clear lines of accountability and seeking redress. So, for example, we're seeing that a lot in different settings, but in particular in kind of precaritized work, but that is increasingly finding its way into the sort of like conventional labor market, for example, automated decisions around performance management, sanctions, and even termination. All of this is a key issue for the bargaining power of workers. Our skills, our dignity, our autonomy, our pay conditions, and our ability to protect and enforce our rights at work. Kind of like tying it back to your sort of sectoral concerns here, particularly around the displacement question. There's obviously a lot of analysis that the finance and insurance sectors are most exposed to AI job and task displacement than any other sector. That's according to the UK government, but lots of other analysis supports that as well. But it's not, we're all kind of in the same sea with this situation, but we're not necessarily all in the same boat. So like there's different groups that will be impacted unequally. So recent International Labour Organization report found that jobs considered the highest risk of AI-driven automation account for 9.6% of female employment in advanced economies like the UK, which is nearly 3 times the share of men, because women are disproportionately represented in certain roles that AI is perhaps more exposed to. They're more exposed to AI. But all of this, to say this, is not necessarily being about pro or anti-AI, because AI is a technology, and what is around it is the specific technology and its impacts and who has the power to shape this. So as much of it is about the technology, it's also about the governance processes, it's about the industrial relations, it's about the legal and policy regime that surround this technology, so that you can potentially get good outcomes like in the social work example, but you can also have really poor outcomes, and we're increasingly seeing them as well. So to kind of like move on about like, okay, what does that mean? What can we do? A little bit briefly on understanding and negotiating AI at work. The first thing is like, we need to find out what is going on. And maybe you're already doing this, but we know from various surveys and research that workers are not adequately, or if at all, consulted or engaged on the introduction of AI technologies into the workplace. So there needs to be an effort to find out what's going on. From there, develop principles and a foundational approach. Like, what is it that we actually want from this technological change? And then drop down those higher level principles into sort of more precise provisions of collective agreements or demands or asks or positions. So just to break that down a little bit, and this should be familiar to us as trade unions, and I think it will be, there are means to access certain information. So if you're in a recognized workplace, you can use Trade Union Relations Act to access information rights if you can argue that it's necessary for collective bargaining. You can request data protection impact assessments. You can move upstream and try to participate and engage the workforce in workforce's voice within the business plans and strategies of your employers. You can ask workers to map what systems are in place and start to gather information in that way, and also including through gathering the views of workers about what is going on, what are they finding, what they're finding difficult, when actually what do they want to do about it. From there, after doing some sort of foundational kind of research about what's actually happening at work, we should draw on key union demands to develop principles and foundations. And here's an example from a piece of work that I did with Communication Workers Union, who are predominantly trying to organize in the telecom sector around this, but also in some of the financial services. And these are the sort of high level principles that they set out. They want a voice in the rollout of AI, they want a fair share, and they want safeguards from bias and discriminations. Like, those are all pretty straightforward, kind of like foundational concerns that unions should have and do have basically across all other aspects of industrial employment relations. And what we're doing is taking those foundational, conventional asks and demands and applying it to this new phenomena. And part of the way in which we can draw on those key demands and give them force is to connect it to existing union infrastructure. So, for example, in lots of workplaces, we'll have equalities reps, we'll have learning reps, and we'll have health and safety reps, as well as people who obviously engage in negotiations. And instead of trying to make everybody completely across every issue about AI, and there are many, we can say, okay, you're an equalities rep, you've had training and motivation to understand equalities at work. These are the dimensions by which AI intersects with equalities, and that's the component part that you need to learn, and we need to add that to your kind of like training and development and participation as equalities reps. It's the same for learning, the same for health and safety, and it's the same for the kind of general stuff around bargaining and negotiations as well. All of that is to say, we do actually have a lot of the infrastructure and culture and practice of dealing with these sorts of things, and we need to sort of elevate and upgrade that for dealing with AI technologies in the first place, and not kind of be blindsided by the sort of newness of this phenomena, whilst also understanding that there are particular characteristics of AI and its effect at work. Then find out a bit more what's going on, develop some high level principles, and the challenge then is to turn it into a kind of issue of negotiation. We understand that it does affect pay, it affects skills, qualities, health and safety, all of those things I mentioned. And those are the things that should be and are like core bargaining issues for unions. But we need to kind of make sure that we turn that into something that, can be made a provision of a collective agreement and tailor it to the key issues of concerns and not kind of get trapped in kind of like trying to argue over everything about digital technologies, but focus on the bits that are actually problematic and that are of concern, and sort of scope out the stuff that's not. There are lots of resources to help with that. So the TUC's AI and employment model legislation is currently being used as a sort of advocacy tool to get the government to adopt and upgrade workers' rights on this question. But it actually sets out in really precise, legally sound terms what does transparency look like around AI, consultation, redress, all of these other kind of high-level principles, but gives the detail, which is actually could be the foundation of a collective agreement. In addition, there's increasingly great resources of collective agreements on AI that are being struck around the world. So Public Services International, which is a international federation of unions, has a digital bargaining hub, and UC Berkeley has a negotiating tech database. Both of those are a database of collective provisions around digital and AI that unions have successfully negotiated within the past year or two that you can review and filter and seek and be inspired by and think about adapting to your own particular context. So to wrap up, that's a bit on the sort of understanding and negotiating at work. Hopefully some of that is familiar and, with the goal to kind of like give us the confidence to make steps into dealing with this. From the TUC's policy side, we're also setting out a kind of like more expansive, kind of comprehensive agenda that we're advocating to government around this, recognizing that it is, a big issue for the economy, for politics, for social concerns. And in August, we published a policy platform called Building a Pro-Worker AI Innovation Strategy, which sets out a number of propositional building blocks for that. So the first is what we call innovation for good work, which is where we're basically saying that there's billions of pounds of public money going into research and development of AI technologies, and unions and workers should be upstream in that at the universities, within the research agencies, and building the technologies that eventually come down to the workplace. The second part is about returning public value to public services, mostly about how procurement is designed and delivered to ensure that workers' rights and interests and jobs and skills are retained within there. Third is about the kind of reforms to corporate governance and collective bargaining and others so that workers can gain a share of productivity gains should they materialize. Fourth is more familiar, which is about employment rights upgrading around this so that there's transparency and redress and consultation. And the fifth part is that if there is significant displacement and disruption to workers and the labour market, that there really does need to be an upgrade in social security and training and skills to help and support workers through that change. So I'll leave it here with a final thing to say is that the labour movement actually has an opportunity to be a leader and an opportunity for union renewal here, because 51% of the public are concerned about the impact of AI on their jobs. And that massively increases to workers in the early stages of their career with 62%. And really interestingly, and this is TUC polling, half the public believe that workers and unions should have an equal say with businesses when it comes to the development and deployment of AI. And that really rises a lot to key groups of voters, particularly for this government. 65% Labour, 60% of Labour voters switching to Reform, and 71% of Labour switching to the Green Party. And all of that to say is that there's a big political opportunity and a sort of opportunity for union renewal here to put ourselves as positive and proactive leaders on this kind of vexed and challenging issue. So I'll leave it there. My email's at the bottom. Feel free to drop me a line. And thank you very much for inviting me to chat to you today.
Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate it. Really interesting discussion. And if you wouldn't mind sending the slides through, we can add them to the slides of the other speakers and send them out. Fiona, I don't think we've had any questions as yet. I think what we'll do is move on to Penny. And what we'll do is we'll go through all the speakers and then we'll put the questions at the end and have a really good debate and discussion at that point. So Penny, if I can pass over to you.
Hello, yes. I'm Penny Jones and I am the responsible AI lead for Zurich Insurance in the UK, but I also wear an extra hat as also being a community rep. So I come to this from both angles. So today what I wanted to do was give you a bit of a feel for how Zurich has embedded responsibility by design into our AI processes. It is part of my role is to make sure that whenever we build or buy AI solutions, we do so responsibly. And we make sure that what we're doing is the right thing for our customers, our right thing for our colleagues, and the right thing for our shareholders as well. So I want to thank Adam for defining AI, because that's always a really difficult challenge. And Zurich works to that same OECD definition. So it's good that we're all on the same page. So I just wanted to start by sort of outlining what Zurich's responsible AI principles are. So we have 4 responsible AI principles: safety, transparency, accountability, and reliability. And starting with safety, this is about making sure that the system is safe and secure, complies with the data protection rules, doesn't increase our cybersecurity risk, and that the way we're using it has absolutely the same level of security as you would expect from any other system or tool. When we talk about transparency, we talk about being clear to the user that they are working with AI. We are not going to hide behind, hi, my name's Bob, how can I help kind of chatbots. If we're using a chatbot, it is clear that they are interacting with a chatbot. We also, in all the tools that our staff have access to, there is a disclaimer on every single one that says this content has been generated by AI. Please check it for accuracy. So we are really transparent about where we are using AI, and we're not hiding behind these tools. When it comes to accountability, it comes back into that disclaimer piece as well. Our staff are responsible for making sure that they accept the decision that the AI has made. We are not forcing them, we're not putting in any automated decision making. Most of our tools either have no automated decision making at all, or it's making a recommendation that the human is quite within their power to give it a thumbs up, give it a thumbs down, disagree completely, do something else. They have autonomy, they have accountability, and they are responsible for what that output is. So we won't have a computer says no situation or a black box where we can't explain what's going on. And reliability is about making sure that the tools have been tested, they're monitored. And when we're testing, monitoring, and making sure these things are fit for purpose and they're reliable, we do that in conjunction with the users. So we don't have our data scientists going away in a basement for 6 months and going, ta-da, here's something we created. It is very much a collaborative approach. And it's also a collaborative approach through the design phase, through the test phase, through the deployment phase, and through the monitoring phase. Once our systems are live and in place. So I thought it might be useful to give you a little bit of insight as to where and how Zurich is using AI within its various different departments. So in claims, we have AI solutions that will read emails, extract key pieces of information from the emails to make sure that they go to the right area and they're flagged as what they are. So if they're urgent, important, they're documents from courts on claims and that on court claims and injury claims, they are prioritized and they go to the right people. We're also looking at different tools that can extract that information from those emails and populate that into our claim systems. This means that we can respond to our customers quicker and actually through the work we've been doing with our claims team, actually with a higher level of accuracy than humans have been able to achieve. But it's been an iterative process. So the first iteration wasn't great, humans were doing better. We've worked with the humans to gradually improve the quality of that piece of work. So now we're confident. It's not perfect. AI is never perfect. It's not magic. But we're confident that the quality that we're achieving in this area is now hitting better quality than we were seeing in the past, that some of our, not our experienced claims handlers, but some of our admin staff were achieving. In terms of underwriting accuracy, we're using AI to analyze some really complex patterns. So the reason I put a picture of some tall buildings there is one of the ways that we have used AI is to analyze the heights of buildings. For those of you that don't work in insurance, the height of a building is really important when we're assessing the risk of a building. So tall buildings are more susceptible to wind claims. Short, fat buildings, wide buildings are more susceptible to flood claims. If you in a situation where we might have a fire, a tall building is much harder to evacuate than a short building. So escape of water claims, if you live in a top floor flat, you're going to cause damage to all of your neighbours below you. Whereas in my house in a bungalow, if I have an escape of water claim, it's just going to flow away under the floor. So it's just me that's impacted. So we have used AI to help us calculate the height of every building in England. What would have happened in the past was our underwriters would have sat there, they'd have gone to Google Street View, they'd have found the property on Google Street View, they'd have counted the number of windows, they'd have multiplied that by 3, and that would have given them a rough guess of what the building was. Now they've got this information at the touch of a button within seconds for any building in England. Unfortunately, we haven't yet got it for Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland because it's data that's provided by the government for England. I think it comes from the Department for the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, which I think is a devolved thing for England, but it is absolutely making a difference. In addition to that, we have built tools using AI to help our underwriters more easily find that information. And we're building AI tools that will allow them now to, when they receive an Excel spreadsheet from a customer, to reformat that Excel spreadsheet to be able to put it into this tool. So what we're doing is we're looking at each stage of the process and where can AI be used to add value or remove overhead and burden, or the mundane, as I think Adam mentioned, and make that process smoother, slicker, and actually hopefully give the underwriters more rewarding things to do than counting windows and multiplying by 3. And then lastly, right across our operation, we have AI available to all of our staff in various different forms for using sort of co-pilots and sort of ChatGPT-like solutions. It's not ChatGPT, but to allow them to use it for ideation, for helping them to rephrase emails, for helping them to write reports, helping them create presentations. So allowing them to take some of that stuff, the admin stuff that they're really probably not very keen on doing, and having the tools there to help them do that. But none of that is enforced upon anybody. If they want to spend hours, as I'm probably guilty of, lining things up in PowerPoint and making sure that all the fonts and everything are pretty, they can do that, or they can use the AI to help them do that. It's there as a support, as an aid, not as a mandated tool. So you might have noticed my background. I'm going through a bit of a thing at the moment about what governance is and what governance isn't. So that's kind of what, for me, these two pictures sum up, is that most people think that governance is like the picture on the left-hand side, that it's about tying you up in knots, sticking you in a box and preventing you from doing what you want to do, and just essentially making you frustrated and angry. What I see responsible AI as being is the right-hand picture, which is, if you're brave enough to cross that ravine, you probably want a safety harness. And I'm here to be that safety harness to help you do those exciting, innovative things, but make sure that when you're doing it, you're complying with all of the various regulations, data protection, the Qualities Act, consumer duty, and all of those other things that we need to comply with. But it doesn't stop you crossing the right bridge. It just means that you're not going to fall. So that's, I love that. Someone gave me those pictures a couple of weeks ago, and I love them as a sort of a nice way of explaining what AI governance is all about. So I think Adam touched on some of this as well. What's really important as part of my role is it's not just about making sure that we do things safely and securely from a technical point of view, but it's really important for me as well that we're building those skills and we're delivering that training. And so a big part of what me and my team do is also delivering training. So we want to create spaces where people can explore the tools, they can ask questions. Nobody is watching them. So we did some sessions last Christmas, and we had a lovely lady who turned around. I think she was probably in her 70s. Not that that makes any difference, but she said, I don't see the point in this. I don't know how it's going to help me. I really don't see that I need AI for anything that I do, which is probably true in the job that she was doing. But we were sat around at lunchtime and we were just chatting and sort of, oh, so what are you up to the weekend then? Oh, it's my golf club dinner award ceremony, and I'm the captain of the golf club and I've got to give a speech. And that was my way in, because we got her to sit there, we got her to use the tools to write her speech for the golf club, and she was sold immediately. And another colleague, one of our health and safety managers, actually at the community conference last year, was complaining that she had to write a health and safety risk assessment for orienteering, and she didn't know where to start. So we set her up with a laptop, we got her to have a go, and typed in, help me write a risk assessment for orienteering. And within seconds, she had a template. It might not have been exactly what she wanted to have, but she had a template that she could work on. Whereas she was fearful about starting with that blank sheet of paper, we filled in the blank sheet of paper and gave her somewhere to start with. So right across from HR to underwriting, and everybody across our organisation has access to the training that we develop and deliver. So we have various different training in our learning hub. We're also using Viva Engage at the moment to put out regular videos, regular hints and tips to get people on board to have a go, to experiment, to not feel what it is they're using. And working together. So we are working together to make sure that, you know, we bring all our colleagues along on the journey, we engage them in the process, and we make sure that people are learning together. And this isn't about the AI being imposed on people, but the AI that being there to assist people. So I've probably covered these bits already, but for me, what we're looking at is AI that empowers and not replaces people. AI that earns trust, not just attention, and AI that helps us work smarter and serve better. And that is through collaborative innovation, working together to solve problems. We don't think that AI is a shiny thing that solves every single problem. What we do is we work with different areas of the business to understand what the problem is, and then we look at how AI can help. I think there's been a lot of talk in the past about we've just got to do it. Well, actually, we're really focused now on how do we create the return on investment? How do we make sure that we're putting AI in the right places? And I often use the example as well of it being kind of Lidl's versus Waitrose. Do our customers want to be Lidl's customers, or do they want to be Waitrose customers? Do they want service, care, empathy, and to be looked after, or do they want their shopping thrown at them? So it's really important that we do this collaboratively and that we do it in a way that we know that our customers and our colleagues want. And responsible AI culture. So we have been delivering responsible AI training wherever anybody will listen to us. So if people ask us to come and talk about AI, the first thing they do is the responsible AI training before we even talk to them about the shiny, because what we want to do is embed their understanding in what responsible AI looks like. And I realise I've got the same strap line on the bottom of this slide as well. So in conclusion, what is AI about for us? So it's ethical innovation. It's making sure that we're building things that are trustworthy, that are fair, that are solid, that are secure, that are reliable, that are dependable, and that we're doing it for the right reasons. And we've got very strong governance frameworks. So I think I'm possibly, in a camp of one or two in insurance in terms of responsible AI. I know there are a few more people doing what I do in the banking sector, but I've been doing this for nearly 4 years, and we have been building the frameworks both in the UK and globally, and we've been quite public about it to make sure that we're doing things in a way that our customers expect. And empowering people through making sure that they understand what the tools are and how to do them. And we are now having many more conversations as well about how we make it sustainable. So we are turning those conversations now to thinking about the planet as well as the people. And that was what I wanted to say. So I'll hand back to Caroline, and I think you're going to talk about the employer charter.
Yeah, thank you, Penny. Yes, so as Penny alluded to when she was talking through her slides, Penny is one of our community union reps, and she's been working quite closely with us on a charter that as a union we're putting to employers that we work with. It's going to be launched probably January 26. It's got three main things that we ask for. I mean, we've been working closely with Zurich for a while on AI. And just to give you an example, one of our reps worked in one of the Glasgow branches as an underwriter, and there were some changes coming in and some bots that they were bringing in to simplify systems. And he actually did some retraining and ended up moving roles from that into programming these bots. So where potentially there was going to be less need for people in the area these bots were going into, rather than losing the knowledge, the loyalty and the service of our rep, they were retrained into becoming one of the people that was programming them. It meant a completely different change in career that they weren't necessarily thinking of, but through some quality training, they've opened up a whole new career path to go into. And that's kind of where our interest and passion in this started from as a union, to making sure that the employers we work with look at that as a first solution before anything else, and that people are at the heart of it. So our charter, the three main aims of it are ensuring that AI doesn't limit entry-level pathways into finance sector jobs, that apprenticeships incorporate AI to prepare them for what those jobs are for the future, that we provide training and opportunities to ensure that AI and new technologies are accessible to existing finance workers. So as Penny mentioned, it doesn't matter what age you are, how long you've been doing your job, AI is going to filter in somewhere, in some capacity, and making sure that those people have got the opportunity to fully engage, to be fully trained, and to utilize these technologies to help them. Often people shy away from using it, and that's the way I've always done it. But I think if we can empower them and give them the knowledge to be able to do that, it will only benefit them. And the other is a call for companies to adopt responsible policies on AI, specifically in the finance sector, but ensuring that new technologies are not used for undue surveillance to undermine or impinge upon workers' rights and protections. And what we mean by that as well is making sure that we know how this technology is going to be used, that they're going to be looked after, they've got somewhere to appeal to, how it's going to be implemented, but also monitoring the fairness and the use of it in terms of health and safety. We've talked about this quite a lot, about the brain drain, that by bringing AI in to take over some of the smaller sort of day-to-day tasks, you're expecting employees to work full out for a full day, and there's no downtime. There are no sort of water cooler breaks like we used to talk about in COVID with the the problems of working constantly from your laptop and not being able to get up and walk around the office because you're working from home, and people tend to work longer and harder. It's going to be a similar situation if companies implement AI, take away a lot of the day-to-day tasks. There isn't going to be as much time for downtime. So we need to make sure that employees are looked after as well in the health and safety aspect of implementing AI. So I will share around with the Alliance for Finance once the charter is launched, but I think it's a really good call on just holding companies to account, asking them to buy into doing things fairly and reasonably, and it starts the process off to be able to support employees and negotiate on AI in the workplace. Okay, what I'll do now is pass over to Nick from Unions 21, and then we'll go to questions after that and have an open up for discussion.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can see the presentation on the screen. Yep. Okay, so just quickly about Unions 21. If you haven't heard of us, we are a non-profit of union people for unions, focused on best practice and innovation for unions as they build for tomorrow. And UK and Irish unions are members, but we also kind of have an international and a European and international reach. One of the things we do is insight work, research, but also training and connections and collecting ideas about how unions are preparing for and making innovation happen within them and preparing for the future. And me, my background is having been head of digital at various types of organizations, and I come to Unions 21 and this work with a concern, I have to be honest. So I worked for a few years as head of digital at Unison, and but I've also worked as head of digital at various non-profits, and non-profits talk about how far behind they are on digital, how they struggle to change and to adapt to the world. Yet when I look at the non-profit world, I see more digital pioneers, I see more senior digital leaders, I see more experimentation with more agility and a much more vibrant ecosystem of support than I do for unions. So that's one thing when you're talking about digital, but when you're talking about AI and the impact it could have on the way that we work and workers, we can't have unions losing relevance, further losing relevance by not understanding the changing world around them in an implicit way. And that's what my focus is. Before I go any further, just a bit of transparency about how I use AI in my materials. So in the case of this, you'll see some Claude analysis of some of the survey results I'll present to you. I have various pieces of a lot of the work I do. I use a tool called Claude AI to discuss the content and to augment my approach. And obviously I spell check throughout. And then there's a couple of automations happening with videos and video tools that kind of create clips and so on based on videos. So I share this because I think it's in one of the principles that was just presented. Transparency is part of building trust. We need trust in this world right now. We should be practicing what we preach. And we all deserve to know how AI is being used in the things that we see and our lives. So a couple of years ago, we started talking to unions. And we had meetings with general secretaries, with union staff at various unions, and we identified 3 core challenges around AI. Lots of unions you'd talk to them and they'd say, we're doing work on AI. They were seeing AI as something that's changing workplaces. They were starting to think about how can we work with employers, things like what Adam was just talking about in terms of AI and negotiations and pushing employers to use AI fairly, fighting for workers' rights. But what was missing was that unions are organizations too. They have their own staff, they do work, and AI will change their work just as it changes other workplaces. So our first challenge we identified was that there's too few unions that are understanding how AI impacts them. And that when I haven't defined AI, and I mean the broadest possible definition of AI. And in fact, I mean AI and emerging tech quite often. So if we don't look at both what happens at the employer side, but also what happens at our internal side, we miss opportunities to improve our work. We might face the same problems that we're warning others about, and we might fall behind as others move forward. It's not just an organizational challenge, though, it's a staff challenge. I talk to lots of union staff and I'll present surveys. Union staff are using and discovering AI tools. They're using them in their daily work. They're finding ways AI can help them. But we'll come to this. Most have not had training. They don't know the risks. They might share sensitive information. They might trust AI too much or use AI in ways that harm workers and their power. So that's the second challenge, is at the staff level. And then the third challenge is a challenge of ecosystems and support. If you look around, there's companies exploring AI, charities testing AI. There's a lot of activity just being presented at Zurich in terms of AI. Yet when you look at the unions, there's actually very few AI experts who understand unions. There's very few unions operations experts who understand AI. And people are working alone on many challenges. So other sectors are learning and understanding where AI is applicable and where it's not to them. And unions are not and need support. So that's what those three challenges are the ones that made us create the Centre for Responsible Union AI, which I lead. Our goal is to help unions engage with AI in a way that we think is part of the way unions have worked ever since they started, is becoming adept at using the technology of their age to fight the worst aspects of that technology. So during the Industrial Revolution, unions used railways, telephones, and they use them to organize workers and fight for rights against things that the Industrial Revolution has created. We are in the same situation now. It's a new technological revolution, and we need to understand how we can use the tools of this revolution to also overcome some of the worst excesses of the ways in which employers might use this technology. And we can't do that unless we understand it. And we need to understand how we can use it, and we need to understand who is already using it. Because as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, the capabilities of AI are improving rapidly. They're not just in terms of how well they are in tests matching human level capabilities, but also in the breadth of different capabilities that they can take on, that AI can take on, and in the speed of that improvement is also speeding up. It's getting better at many different things and getting better faster, and that means that we need to pay attention now, and every day is a good opportunity to start. And obviously, behind this all, I talked about AI as I'm looking at all AI, but I'm very focused on generative AI because it's the thing that's most right now. ChatGPT and tools like ChatGPT are the things that most people are engaging with, and it's the area where there's most dramatic and rapid change happening in terms of what union staff are using and doing and what the possibilities are. So it's not just ChatGPT, actually. It's Microsoft adding AI into Copilot, which is just released into all Office. It's Google doing pretty much the same with its tools. AI search now being part of anytime you search Google, it offers you search. This is a big vector of change for our society, and it's a big vector of change for how unions work. Even phones have AI embedded. So we've been running a survey of union staff. This is not a scientific survey where we can say X% of union staff are using AI. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to surface that union staff are using AI, and we need to understand how they're using AI. Even if the percentage is small, it's still an issue. Actually, I don't think the percentage is small, but when the people that have asked and responded to our survey, they about half of them self-declare being at standstill or crawl with AI. They're doing very little. And then about the same are at a more advanced stage. Yet, later on, I'll talk about their hopes. They talk about productivity, about impact, about innovation. They have a demand to be supported by AI, and it's not being met by the unions themselves. People are using AI without training, without policies, and without support. This is creating a area of vulnerability in the union movement that needs dealing with. So I talked about hopes. The top hope's productivity. Now, when I think about this, actually, I think this is not just a sign that we will want to do more work in our day. Picking up the point of what was just said about the community charter, I think this is actually a sign that we hear the hype as union staffers, and the hype around AI is all around productivity. Actually, when you talk to people, they're talking about work-life balance, about doing more of the work I like versus the work I don't like. They're talking about things that are not necessarily productivity, but about quality of work and quality of life. So I think two things. Firstly, union staff have the same hopes as others, but also union staff are not immune to all the hype that is going around about what AI will do. They are hearing it, and it is impacting them in terms of their thoughts about what this technology can do for them. So we ask them how they use it. And you can see here, the kind of darker areas are where you get most answers. The areas that they are using most, they are using AI most is text development. So writing often, but also transcribing, researching, summarizing texts is a big area. So again, I do this for both unions and non-profits. I don't see very major differences in how union staff are using AI and what they're doing with AI compared to other organizations I talk to. We are pretty normal in that regard. And things they might say, they say, I hope AI will be encouraged in my union. When they talk about hopes, I hope that discussions will happen among staff and leadership, and then the AI becomes part of our strategic planning. Yet, when they think about their union, of the 280, 106 said that their unions are only exploring the potential of AI internally. 100 of them, almost exactly the same number, said their unions are not engaged at all on how AI could be used for internal operations. There's no thinking about it at all. Only 20 said that their unions are actively thinking this could be something that helps us as a union manage our operations. That's not that dissimilar, frankly. I think it's interesting. We asked the same question, but about how many of them say their unions are looking at AI as a policy, advocacy, industrial issue. And interestingly, 89 said their unions are not engaged on that side, which I think is a challenge in and of itself, because I think I don't know a sector that's not going to in some way be affected by AI, and we need to shore that bit up too. But the biggest challenge is we are asking unions to go, and Adam talked about this earlier, to go and negotiate policies or principles and talk about governance of AI in their organizations. Yet 70 people don't know if their union has a policy. 67 of the respondents said their union has no policies and has no plan to create a policy. I talk to unions quite often, including, for example, ones in the education sector, where they say we have a complete credibility gap here, where we are asking our members to do things that we are not remotely doing ourselves as unions. So there's a big disconnect between staff who understand they want to move forward, but organizations that are not yet moving forward. So hopes is one side. There are fears too. I think one of the things I'd take away from this, and it's a challenge when you think about union staff, is union staff are not in the same position as society. The numbers who say that they are concerned about their own job is much, much lower than anything you see when you talk about the sector, other sectors. So we have to understand that we are in a privileged position where we think as union staff our jobs are not going to be affected, and there's a challenge. We need to make sure that's true. And I think actually our jobs will be affected, even if it's just changing tasks, changing nature of our work. But very few people fear for their jobs, and yet we're representing people who do. There's also, I think, the other thing to take away from the fears that people report is just how broad the responses are. It's not like the hope question where productivity was a big winner. Actually, people are equally scared about AI perpetuating biases, about the loss of the human touch, about privacy and data security risks. There's a wide range of concerns, and these are widely shared. There's a real hunger underneath this for, I think, for responsibility and adoption. They do want, and from the earlier answers, you can see they want AI that makes their work impactful, but they're really concerned about protecting member data, about augmenting their humanity, not replacing organizers with chatbots, about being transparent and explainable about how they use AI, and so it's serving social justice and it's serving workers, not profit or anything else. There's a lot. I mean, in the free text fields of this, there's some great comments about big tech. I haven't brought any out, but that's a big area too. Is our values are really important here, and yeah, training is by far the biggest demand. In fact, very few people most people say they want training. Very few people say they have been to training. Only about 410 of those who have responded, so about half who responded to this, have never received training. And that's where we are offering training. I can mention it later, but yes, all of this leads to a big risk, frankly, and someone picked it out. I think the top 3 fears about AI was missing one. AI misuse by union staff and employees in general. If employees are not trained to understand appropriate application and use of AI, technical and ethical considerations, that brings risk, and that's a fear that we should have as a union movement. Okay, couple of examples, which are not showing for some reason. Why is the video not showing? Let me just see if it shows if I click.
So during our training, Joe, you were experimenting with using AI to support you in recruiting new members, in developing workshops and role plays.
So my experiment started by asking ChatGPT for a basic slideshow, and the results were okay, but a basic slideshow was what I got. But then, as confidence and curiosity grew, I wanted AI to help develop that into an engaging workshop for reps instead. So using a more detailed prompt provided a much richer response. Essentially, ChatGPT helped me shape scripts and scripts for role playing and course content, and actually, hone the content to deliver what I needed. Yes, it did provide relevant and good answers for me to consider further and refine the content.
Okay, so that's one example. I'm going to give you one more example of someone that's attended our courses and what they've done.
Lisa, so looking at our survey results, text development is the main way that people say they've experimented with AI. More than 2/3 have tried using generative AI for this. You've been experimenting with helping writing case letters. Can you tell us a little bit more about you trying a while?
Yeah, so I do think I'm at the very beginning of my AI journey. So I'm starting with the basics. And one of the things that we have to do for every case is write a case plan letter outlining our first conversation, what the plan is. I think probably other unions do the same thing. What I used to do is get my file note and go through that, changing member to you and going through all of these different things. But instead, what I've been able to do is put the template into Copilot, put in my file note, and it takes me 3 minutes instead of about 20 minutes. So in terms of that efficiency, it's really helpful.
One of the complaints we've had has been about sort of responsibility in doing that. So you've been clear about using Copilot for that. Why is that important?
So Copilot doesn't share any information outside of the organisation, and it doesn't train itself on your conversations. So it's much more secure. But just to be on the safe side again, anyway, I never really put in member information. I just put in the member. So.
Okay, so there's also I'm aware of time, but I'm not. We've got videos about unions and how they've rolled out AI policies and AI labs and so on. So one of the key things we're trying to do is, one of those demands was understanding how other unions are using it. We're trying to fill that gap and get those pieces of information in. Sorry, and just to finish off. Yeah, one of the things, if you're a union staff member and you want to come on one of our courses, you can go to the website. I put up a link in a minute, and we're running training courses with other unions. As to try and with other union staff to try and understand and learn together how we can use AI in a way that is worker friendly, but also responsible, and try and learn the kinds of skills that we're going to need to be able to better understand how to represent our workers as they go through the same processes. So I think this is about, you know, learning for ourselves so that we can also represent others who are going through this process better. Thank you very much. That's the website, Agile Union, so AI.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. I think now the opportunity is to open up a discussion, whether it's there's any of the panelists that have questions for each other. I know we've got some questions that have been put into the chat, so we can sort of work our way through those. One of the things I did want to flag is my worry initially, and Nick, you picked up on that, about being trained to utilize AI properly rather than having a little bit of knowledge and potentially making mistakes with it. But one of my concerns is that we talk about upskilling with AI, but is there a danger that we are going to de-skill some of our employees because they overutilize AI and so they lose those skills? Going back a bit to many years ago when we used to do maths at school without calculators, you bring in a calculator and you get to a point where sometimes people can't do any basic math skills without getting their calculators out. And I just think, for me, there is a slight worry that we overutilize it. So, for example, putting everything through ChatGPT to write all sorts of letters and analyze things, that you lose the ability to personally analyze. So if that AI falls over, or gets hacked, for example, that the people left behind can't do that job anymore to the level that they probably could have done before.
So I mean, I think that there's two different questions there. One is the training around for individual staff. The other is the change management for the organizations. And for me, the second thing is a management problem. If you find the members of your team are over relying on any technology and not able to bring their skills and their experience and their wisdom, and I think it's a lot of what we will need to focus in on is what is human. What are our most human values and the things that we can offer? I think there's a strong argument that in lots of cases you can get by in life without needing to do complex multiplications without a calculator, and that's not necessarily the most human thing you can do. Spend time doing it, and so I think that's one of the questions that we have to, as a society and as individuals, work through, is a little bit and in the union movement, where do we put our human time to make the most of it? And I think that's management, a strategy, an organizational challenge, and it's slightly separate from the training. Although I think good training would obviously talk to you about how to use it in a way that augments your thinking and doesn't take away your thinking. So I don't focus that much on generating content with AI, because I think actually that's I think it's more interesting and more useful to say, here's something I've written, critique it and make it better and tell me everything I've missed and do all of those things, than it is to have someone write something for you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Just going to have a look for you, and I don't know whether you've seen some of the questions and we can put to them.
Yes, that's the first question. Would be, what mechanisms exist to ensure workers can challenge or appeal decisions made by AI systems? Who is responsible? Is it the person who programmed the AI or the managers implementing it? This would also be relevant for customers if an AI decision says no, for example, to a claim. Will there be human oversight to make sure it's fair and correct in the decisions made? So would one of the panel like to respond to that question?
I guess I can chip in from a Zurich perspective, that we always say that the human makes the decision. So in the example of our claims processing, the human makes the final decision. The AI will do parts of the process. The AI might flag things that are potentially fraudulent that a person needs to investigate, but the decision is always ultimately made by a person. And I think that sort of comes back into some of the stuff we're doing with the AI charter, and also some of the things that Adam mentioned that the TUC has been doing. It is about making sure that the human is always accountable for the decisions that they make, and they shouldn't be able to hide behind an algorithm. They shouldn't be able to blame the computer. They should be transparent in the ways that they are managing. And certainly Caroline and I have been talking about things like voice to text transcription for call centres. And actually what we need to be doing is training the managers to work in a new way. So their quality control processes need to change and adapt to the new way they are being fed the information, but the way that they manage the human shouldn't change. There should still be conversations, there should still be coaching and training and development and a human accountability and the opportunity to learn, develop and change your behaviours. It should never be, you're fired because the computer said so.
I'll just come in briefly on that. And I agree with everything Penny said. Legally, the employer is obviously responsible because like that and that would be the case as it would be with any other issue or grievance raised at work. There is provisions within UK GDPR and the Data Use and Access Legislation Act around prohibitions and protections from solely automated decision making. So there shouldn't be any automated decision making that's only done by a system, apart from a number of particular circumstances. And there are opportunities for individual workers supported by their union to contest and seek redress about that, including seeking information through what's called subject access requests to find out what data is held by the employer and perhaps narrow that into the decision. However, there is not a specific or extensive regime of rights around accountability and redress for algorithmic management and automated decision making in the workplace.
Oh, you've gone to mute, Adam.
And that is the basis for what the TUC has been trying to advocate for. And I've included the link to the TUC's AI bill within there. I will say that the other mechanism, of course, is collective agreements, like outside legislation, outside of policy guidance. Like the collective agreement is a place in which you can introduce these sorts of processes that kind of like underscore best practice.
Great, thank you.
Thanks very much. This is probably more of a political question, but how can the government avoid a scenario where large tech companies benefit from AI while public finances and workers bear the cost? And by that I mean, as AI automates more jobs, how will governments compensate for the loss of income tax and national insurance contributions? Do you think there could or should be a robot tax for companies as they increase their savings and profits from using AI?
Adam, I think that might be in your paper as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take that one briefly. Robot tax, I'm not sure, but like there's definitely a role for taxation regimes, and lots of organizations, including, for example, the IMF, which is hardly a sort of like, left-wing organization, is calling for taxation incentives to encourage employers to opt for the use of automation technologies that are complementary and that do augment workers rather than primarily displace workers. The other aspects will obviously be around a patchwork of different things to ensure that any economic or productivity gains that do materialize from AI are effectively shared. So obviously tax has a role for that. Collective bargaining has a role for that. Like the primary way that wealth is shared within society is through distribution, through wages and taxation. But there's also, I think, a really important role, and this is obviously a tricky one politically, but is corporate governance. In the UK at the moment, a lot of firms are dominated by shareholder interests that are quite short-termists, are remote from the kind of immediate concerns and sustainability of the organization. And in other places, including in Europe, workers have direct participation within corporate governance structures, and so that they're able to shape the strategies and long-term orientation and are enfranchised within the sort of interests of the long-term and longevity of the company. And what that means is that there will be less incentives to do that sort of like cut and run, automate all the workers, drive down costs, extract profit, and gut the organization, as we see a lot happening in kind of like heavily kind of like financialized firms. And so there is a role for taxation, but there's also general other levers around economic and industrial strategy and employment rights strategy that can help to ensure that any benefits that do emerge from this at kind of like the macro level don't just end up in fewer and fewer people accruing all of the gains.
Thanks, Adam. I think that kind of leads on to one of the other questions we've had, because it also we've had a question that talks about this sort of tax to recognise the environmental impact of AI and the amount of energy consumed and what it takes to keep the machines cool. And I think that sort of filters in both from a policy perspective, but an employer impact to actually make sure they tie in AI with their sort of environmental goals and making sure that's tied up, because we see a lot of people looking at their carbon footprint when it comes to travel and staff going on flights to various parts of Europe, but maybe we need to be looking at actually what the environmental impact of this is, in the same way that we have to report on the carbon footprint of employers.
And that's a real challenge, because at the moment the big tech firms are not very transparent with us. So it's a challenge. It's something that we absolutely want to do. It's something that, you know, is sustainability is a key part of Zurich's DNA. But it's hard to get that information out of those big tech firms. And I think that's probably where we need the likes of the regulators to step in and frankly force disclosure of this information, because at the moment it's completely opaque. So we will start looking for alternative ways to try and measure some of this stuff. But until our tech providers can provide us with that information, we can't reliably report it. A lot of what they do as well is using carbon credits and carbon offsetting. So when you see their public disclosures are a lot lower than the actual reality of the environmental cost of AI, both building it and maintaining it, or inference as they call it.
And I guess that's where we need the government to step in and really push for this policies on companies disclosing what that is and the costs of that.
Yeah, I think that's really right, because basically there needs to be a floor of best practice, otherwise there'll be a race to the bottom, and that's the same for automation and downward pressure on wages and conditions as it is for the environment. And so like companies and employers that are trying to do it better will be undercut by companies and employers who are not prepared or not willing to do that. And so like we do need a sort of regulatory floor to basically like lift the standard across the whole economy.
Agree.
So what do the panel think about the idea of mandatory AI impact assessments in the workplace?
We have them at Zurich. I think what I would like to see, and I think the public sector is bringing that in as well, so I think it is, and the ICO issued some guidance this week as well on their AI policy, and I think they've put in there that risk and impact assessment. Certainly when I talk to my peers in responsible AI roles, those companies with responsible AI roles have risk and impact assessments. I don't know that it's necessarily the be all and end all. You need the governance, the policies and everything else. It's not just do the risk and impact assessment, great, then we put it on the shelf. You need to have the whole structure that goes around it. And I think at the moment, a lot of firms haven't quite started thinking about that yet. They should be. And again, that's maybe for us as a community to push that forward.
Yeah, I mean, my take on that, it comes back to the TUC's model AI bill. We have a segment in there that sets out what would be a good standard of a workplace impact assessment, because obviously there's lots of different ways to do an impact assessment, and sometimes they can be a bit tokenistic or a bit kind of like paper thin. And one of the features of the process that TUC puts forward is that the workers are participating within that, which kind of like helps to not only increase the ability for workers to kind of like argue for good rights and protections, but also for proper problem definition and to shape the technologies that will eventually help with effective and proper adoption. One of the big things that's happening, particularly with Gen AI across the private sector, is that a lot of companies don't necessarily understand what their workers actually do, trying to introduce systems into a workplace without consulting the workers because they think that that's a pain, or they think that there's going to be a problem or a drag. But then quite quickly find out that this sort of like magic dust of AI is not really viable for automating or augmenting the systems without the insight and the expertise that workers have. So part of that impact assessment process should be about workers being consulted and participating in defining what the problem is, defining what the risks might be, and defining what the mitigation strategies are, and making that a active dialogue, which means that I think perhaps paradoxically, both groups, like the employer and the workers and the union, become parties in solving a problem rather than one kind of like introducing and dropping something onto another group, which is where you get strife or frustration or lack of buy-in and those sorts of issues, which eventually, it lead to weaker adoption and poor outcomes for everyone.
Okay, thank you. In your view, what is the single biggest opportunity and the single biggest threat that AI presents to the workplace, and how quickly do you think this change in use of AI is going to unfold?
So for me, I probably go bigger than the workplace. I would like to see AI used in the NHS to help clinicians, and I think, I can't remember if it was Adam or Nick who had it in their slides, to help clinicians remove the admin burden, because I think there is massive societal benefits from that. I think if you can get rid of some of the admin in the NHS, you can get people through the NHS quicker, you can help people with their mental health, you can get people back to work, you can reduce crime, you can start snowballing this stuff to see how it could make a really big difference to society. But you need to find the right problems within the NHS to solve, and it's not necessarily diagnosis, but it could be just typing up notes, just giving every doctor back 5 minutes of every 15-minute appointment that they have by not having to write the notes. So that's for me where it's finding the right use case, finding the right problem. And the problem is probably not the sexy problems that need solving. It's the fundamental high volume, low value stuff that we fix that then snowballs the benefits through society.
Thanks very much. Does anybody else want to?
I'll come in. I think in terms of opportunities, it's kind of similar, but I think you can expand it to workplace. I think that if you look at, let's take one particular type of workplace, which is kind of knowledge workplaces. So a lot of people are knowledge workers, and that's not been something that's historically it's been quite disorganized, quite chaotic. If anyone that uses email and sees how many different ways people use email, how many different expectations are around email, there's lots of things that are pretty problematic about those kinds of works. And so I think there's a great opportunity there for us to hopefully get rid of some of the things that are kind of that are very burdensome and not great for our mental health about the way work works, in particularly in knowledge work. I think that the flip side of that is probably the biggest threat. This happens. I think the answer to how quickly this will happen, I think, is actually happening quite quickly, really quite quickly. I think the number of emails I now receive regularly that are definitely written by ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever is high, and it's getting higher every month. I think the number of I think that the release 2 days ago a few days ago of a app that can create fake videos of any dead person and any live person that gives consent, and is being used to create videos of Martin Luther King doing all sorts of things and whatever. Like, I think we're in a world where suddenly I think the biggest immediate impact we're going to see is a complete breakdown in trust in society, and I think that's going to have all sorts of very, very deep ramifications, because it underpins so much of what we do, is that we have to trust the things that we are presented with. And that's not a workplace threat, but I think it's going to be part of, it's going to create huge divisions in workplaces, because it's going to just like any other technology, the things that we use as consumer, and this is a consumer-led tool, end up having massive impacts in the workplace. And I think that's what we're going to see first, is consumer-led adoption and consumer tools creating massive challenges for us in workplaces. If people were used to be banned from using Facebook in the office, and that was a kind of point of contention in some offices, I think, it's going to have a massive impact.
Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly then, the biggest opportunity, and obviously the risk or threat is obviously usually the flip side, but I think about AI as a automation technology. It automates certain tasks. Gen AI automates content creation, automated decision making, automates decisions, so on. And what automation technologies do is that they do tasks that otherwise humans might do. And so the one side of that is that we will be able to do more, or have more interesting things, or have more free time. The downside, which I think is the politics and the industrial relations and the economics of it, is that all of that extra value is captured by a small group of people. And if you think about what happened in the sort of first industrial revolution, that was basically like an automation revolution. Craft artisans were replaced by mass production using automated machinery, and skills were sort of like fragmented and replaced by the division of labor and task automation. And in many ways that was really good, but it took a long time for the gains of that to be distributed and shared and kind of like balanced and recalibrated. And obviously that was the birth of the modern trade union movement that enabled that to happen. So I think there's a really big challenge for us as a labor movement, as society as a whole, is to think about how this technological change is a social change, and how we'll kind of like set up the scaffolding of like regulation and policy and industrial relations and employment practices and everything else to ensure that the technological change and advancement results in social progress. Because if we see it kind of entrenching inequality, I think there's a really big concern about what that means for our kind of social cohesion and the already kind of like quite unstable dynamics that we have in this country around the world. And I'm a bit concerned about the gap between disruption and kind of like stabilization. I don't think that mass job displacement is going to happen within a couple of years. I think that there's a big difference between the technical capabilities of a system and then its adoption into a messy, complicated, bureaucratized workplaces. But I also think it's in that latter part where we have the opportunity to add the humane components to it, which is the stuff that we've all been talking about: policies, bargaining, regulation, and that's how we'll make this technology something that's socially useful rather than just technologically impressive.
Yeah, Adam, and I guess what we need to do is make, as a community, as a movement, what we need to do is make both government and businesses realize that if there's no jobs, they've got no customers. So, right, their businesses will fail by the fact that nobody has money to buy their products. So that's the ultimate problem at the end of this thing, is that we need to be thinking as a society, how do we make sure that there is that safety net that we can all carry on consuming the things they want to sell us?
Exactly, Penny. Thank you.
Thank you. And one final question. Are there controls to ensure that employers who use AI do so in a secure way, so that personal data cannot be accessed outside the organisation and or used to train AI? The concern being the data could build up a prejudice against individuals by other AI decisions by other firms where the data has been absorbed into their system.
I guess, Adam, Nick, as well. We've got GDPR, we've got the Equalities Act, we've got lots and lots of legislation. AI is not absolved from having to comply with the legislation that is already out there. I did some work with the ABI, I think it was last year, the ABI guide, which I will dig out for you in a second. But we went through all the different regulation that applies, and it all still applies to AI. It doesn't matter how it's used. Now we can use AI, we can use data for training as long as we are transparent in our privacy notices, what we're doing, why we're doing, how we're doing it. And it comes back again, I think, to that consulting piece and engaging employees in that process. But there is we don't think we need extra regulation. What we need to do is make sure that firms are applying what we already have.
And I think, Penny, it goes back to something Nick said, sorry, Adam, about training people to use AI, because I think where those issues will come will be when people have a little bit of knowledge and utilize it, but aren't not in the right way.
Yeah, I agree with everything Penny said. My addition is that we have a lot of policy and regulation that is really useful for this. I think there are some gaps, but policy legislation is only as good as the means by which it's applied and enforced. And I think that's part of the role for the movement, is to upskill ourselves to know how to engage with the topics, to get our act together around the data protection stuff, around its impacts on equalities, health and safety, employment rights, those sorts of things, so that we can advise, we can negotiate, we can advocate, because otherwise it remains on a piece of paper and not a kind of active and living, breathing thing.
Great, thank you.
I think we've got to the end of the questions. I don't know if there's anything that any of the speakers wanted to add, or anything that has come to mind since we started this. If there's anything you wanted to still talk about we've not mentioned. No?
I guess I would probably just wrap up by saying stay curious, live it, learn it, don't fear it, because it's not going anywhere, as Nick mentioned earlier. So we all need to be responsible for our own personal development as much as our employers. So keep learning, stay curious, keep experimenting, have fun and play.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to each of the speakers for their time and effort that they've put in today, and for bringing their knowledge to the conversation, because it's been really interesting. I think it's going to start some really good discussions between the people on the call and in our workplaces, and I think make the use of the links that they've put in the chat, and if we can get hold of the slides, if you're happy for us to share them, we can send them around to everybody that registered, and to those that weren't able to make it but will no doubt watch the recording afterwards. So thank you very much for your time, much appreciated.
Thanks all.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.